So we start the same way every time. Let's all take a minute, close our eyes, feet flat on the floor. Deep breath in, blow it out, and let's try to find that little place, that little flame, just an inch or two below our belly buttons. That place where power lives, where strength lives, where truth lives. If you can't feel it, just imagine it. Drop your breath down to that place. Feel the floor below your feet, your butt on the cushion or the chair or wherever you're sitting. Feel into your body. And breathe. Let go of anything that's going to keep you from being present on this call. Anything in your outside life that's going on, it will be there in an hour. You can let it go. Remove any internal distractions. Place your hand on that spot we were just talking about, just an inch or two below your belly button. Feel your breath filling there. Your center, nobody else's. Your truth, nobody else's. Put your other hand up on your heart. Feel the connection between the two. Our power, our love. Our sense of doing in the world, our sense of safety in the world. Our sense of feeling. Feel the interplay between the two. And feel how presence is the magic that connects them both. Begin to come back into your body. Maybe wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers, roll your shoulders back. Welcome back into you. Take your time. Begin to slowly open your eyes and come back into the room. Come back into us. Beautiful. Excuse me. So gang, about 4 years ago, almost to the day, I think it may be 4 years ago next week or so, I drove from Santa Barbara down to Los Angeles and walked in for the first time to a place called the Against the Stream Meditation Center in Santa Monica. And I sat through the meditation and the discourse after. And then because I chugged a bottle of water on the drive down there, I went and used their bathroom. And I came out of the bathroom and looked immediately to the right, and there was a corkboard. And on the corkboard, there was a piece of paper tacked up, and it said, "The Year to Live program." And I went, that's fascinating. What is this? And I went home and Googled it, and then eventually got on the phone with someone and talked, someone at the Against the Stream Meditation Center, and talked about the Year to Live program. And it was a 12-month long ordeal that would keep me in Los Angeles. And at the time, I had just recently found out I was getting divorced. Perhaps she wasn't sure yet. And just recently found out that my business partnership was also ending. He wasn't that sure yet. And I was pretty sure that my relationship with drugs and alcohol was also over. Pretty damn sure. So a lot of things in my life were up in the air. So I couldn't commit to 12 months in Los Angeles. But it's a whole nother story. About 3 months later, I made a decision that when I found out my marriage was over and my business partnership was completely over, and I had this massive amount of space in my life, that I was going to take the entire next year and live what I called the Year to Live project, in which I would live all of 2016 as if it were my last year alive. And I used a year to live as a guide for that project. And it was the most remarkable and transformative year of my life, especially at a time when I had just gone through so much loss. And so why do I tell you that story? Well, most of you know who our guest is on the call, but for me, this is a massive, massive personal full circle moment, because our guest tonight started the Against the Stream Meditation Center. And I came into that building at a time when I had just lost just about everything that I had ever built or thought that I ever wanted. And I'll let him speak for himself in a minute, but I believe that now we are at a different point, and I'm the one facilitating a conversation for someone who's also experienced a significant amount of loss. So those of you who don't know who I am, welcome to the Uncivilized Unplugged podcast. A couple of weeks ago, someone said, you should really do a podcast. And I did one in the normal podcast fashion and didn't find it all that stimulating. So I said, you know what I really want to do when I hear a podcast? I always think, man, I wish I could have been in the room with them. That would be super cool. So I opened up this idea to, what if we did this live? And what if we did this on Zoom? And how would that not only affect the audience, would that make me nervous? Would that change the conversation? Knowing that it was real, it was organic, it was a thing. And so here we are, just a couple of weeks later, and it's a massive success. My name is Traver Boehm. I'm the founder of the Uncivilized Men's Movement, Man Uncivilized, the course, as well as the Uncivilized Nation. And my personal mission is to change the way 1 million men express their masculinity at a time when I kind of think we need to do some work. It's by taking what I believe is the inherent primal masculine in men, something that's not very popular right now, but adding in a massive amount of the divine masculine and consciousness. And those 2 points, primal and divine, are important to keep in our conversation. They're going to be in our conversation tonight. And so keep them in your consciousness. Now, usually when I say, let's frame the hour, this is what it's going to be. I want you guys to think that you're sitting in my living room with a guest and you're just overhearing a conversation. But I think tonight there's a different frame. And tonight we have to say the setup has to be differently, because we are going to be talking about things that are really uncomfortable. We are living now in extraordinarily unprecedented times. It's the very reason my movement exists. There's a very reason why I work with men every day. There's a reason why there's a men's movement happening. Masculinity is being redefined. And in my humble opinion, it's being done horribly. Right? Just this week, we had the APA come out and say stoicism, aggression and dominance, and risk-taking are bad things in men. So let's just get rid of them. We have a Gillette commercial that's kicking up all kinds of internet tizzies. There's an alchemization. There's something in the air if you don't feel it with masculinity. And we are living at a time when social media is the new trial place, and the court of law is public opinion. The public opinion is now truth. And that's really, really fucking scary to me. And I think it's really, really dangerous. When we're having guilt and innocent determined by the number of people who believe or the number of people who don't believe, and or ramifications without a trial, without due process. That's the direction the civilized world's going in. And I don't think we're not working more towards freedom. Tonight, we are going to talk about massive topics. And my week has been fascinating. I would love to share some of the emails I've gotten that have said, don't do this. You're dead in the water as soon as this conversation is over. Fuck them, right? Have we gotten to a place where we can't even have conversations? That's the question I asked this morning. Like, have we really gotten to a place where we can't have conversations? And more importantly, have we gotten to a place where we can't have conversations about the things we need to be having conversations about most? That's a big question. And so I want to frame this by saying my goal, just full transparency, my goal here is to have conversations and look at things from all the ways that people really want to, but are afraid to, or can't, because the social ramifications are too high. We are not here for a trial. We are not here to decide innocence or guilt. We're here to look at truth from a number of different angles. My role here tonight is to play devil's advocate. I'm going to ask questions that upset people. If you're listening to this, my name is Traver Boehm, and I'm going to ask you questions that upset you. Take a deep breath. We're going to do this. And I also have to admit that I have personal bias. I run a men's movement. I have a lot in common, which will come out through this conversation with our speaker tonight. I am a man. He and I have the same haircut, if you haven't noticed. We have the same stylist, we like to call it. So I want to acknowledge that from the get-go. I'm going to try to be as unbiased as I can, but know inherently I have them. That's the frame. We need to be having these conversations. And so with that introduction, please allow me to introduce our guest, Noah Levine. Noah, I'm going to let you speak for yourself and on your own behalf, but before we say anything, let me first say thank you for coming on. Thank you for having a conversation that people say we shouldn't have. And personally, thank you for the work that you've done in the world, the good you've done in the world, the people you've helped, and personally, how much that transformed my life. I have been to Refuge recovery meetings. I read your book when I decided to quit drinking and smoking pot and living a numb life, and it was a massive influence. So thank you. And I would love for you to take over and tell us, to people who don't know who you are. I know a number of people on this call know exactly who you are, and they're waiting. But for those people who don't, can you give us a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are, how you built what you built? Please.
Sure. Thanks. I'm happy to be here, and I'm curious as anybody where this conversation will go. My background is of teenage drug addiction and rebellion and incarceration that brought me in 1988 to being locked up for the umpteenth time. And my father, Stephen Levine, the author of The Year to Live, and a well-known author and teacher in the 70s and 80s and 90s especially. I grew up with this meditation teacher. I had my own suffering, my own trauma, my own difficulties, dissatisfaction, angst that for me led to crime and drugs and incarceration. And at 17 years old, my dad said, I was sitting in a padded cell after a suicide attempt, and he said, how about some meditation practice? And I'm sure I'd been offered mindfulness meditation in the past, and it never occurred to me that it would be a good idea, but I was desperate enough in that moment, in the midst of active drug addiction, alcoholism, and looking at years of incarceration, to have the willingness to say, I got to do something different. And I started meditating. I sat in my cell and tried to pay attention to my breath and tried to ignore my mind, tried to count my breath out 1, in 2. Every time my attention went back into thinking about what's going to happen at court, what's prison going to be like, the terror of the future, or my mind went to the past and all of the shame and regret and resentment about all of the pain in my life, and all of the blame that my mind was doing, blaming myself, blaming everyone else. I just kept coming back to the present, and it was the beginning of a meditation practice. And, when I started meditating back then, I couldn't do it very well at all, but I got it right from the beginning. There's something powerful here in being able to ignore the mind and disobey the mind, rather than doing what my mind is telling me to do, which is suffer about the future and the past. There is a refuge in the present. Even though that present time refuge was a padded sail in a locked facility, it wasn't like, oh, great, like this wonderful present. The present sucked. But that fucked up present moment was better than what my mind told me the future was going to be like, and what my memory told me about the past. And so mindfulness became a life-saving, life-transforming practice for me back then, over 30 years ago. And I addressed my addiction, got sober, stayed sober. And, I found in the beginning, I think the first couple years I was spiritual shopping, kind of. Like I heard in the 12-step rooms, you have to have a spiritual experience, you have to have a higher power. And I was skeptical. I came in certainly as an atheist, and they said, well, try being like an agnostic and, like have an open mind about these things. And I was like, oh, I'll try. But it was only in meditation that I was finding any relief. The prayer didn't make sense to me. The theistic concepts didn't make sense to me, that there was a God that was going to remove my cravings and my self-centeredness and didn't make sense, never made sense. I couldn't get my mind around that sort of magical thinking of theism. But in Buddhism, I was finding this very practical solution, this tool that if I pay attention, I see the impermanence of things. And if I let go, and if I see the impermanence of things, I see that whatever's happening, it'll change, it'll arise, it'll pass. Can I tolerate it? Can I learn to, and then I started to learn about, rather than meeting pain with hatred and resentment and aversion, can I meet it with some kindness and some compassion and some tenderness and some acceptance? And in the beginning, it's really just tolerance. Can I learn to be uncomfortable? And the answer was yes, I can learn to be uncomfortable. I can stop running from my pain and learn to be uncomfortable. And so anyways, long story, and I could go on and on, but long story is that I found in Buddhism something that made sense to me. I found in recovery a community of people that were my people. Other recovering people who were trying to do some form of spiritual practice, even though I didn't really resonate with a lot of the practices in the recovery rooms, I resonated with the community, the fellowship. In Buddhism, we call it Sangha. It was so important for me to have sober friends. I was also very much involved in the punk scene from a young age. And in the punk scene in the late 80s, early 90s, there was more punks becoming spiritual. And there was bands like Youth of Today and the Cro-Mags and Bad Brains, and Youth of Today became Shelter, and they became like Hindu yogi punks. And so then I had that influence of like, these are my people, drug-free, straight edge, spiritual rebellion. And I just was, I got I think as an addict, I tend to do things all the way. And so when I started meditating, I got very serious about it, started doing retreats, started wanting, going from this kind of nihilistic, self-destructive lifestyle to like, actually, I want to get enlightened. I've heard about this thing called liberation, enlightenment, freedom, and I want that. That's what I've been seeking. That's what I was seeking in the crack and the needles and the booze. I was seeking freedom, and I was getting temporary avoidance of my pain. And then Dharma gave me a solution to actually healing and to recovering. After some years of sincere practice, my teacher said, hey, we want you to teach. And Jack Kornfield said, I want to train you to teach. And my friends started saying, hey, we want you to teach us. You're less of an asshole now that you meditate. And we would like to be less of assholes. And we would like to, you're onto something here. And so then I started these like little meditation groups in my living room. And then at some point, that year to live practice, I did that year to live practice in 1997, 96, 97. And I'd been in and out of junior college. I was a high school dropout, but I'd gone back and GED and was doing some education. And I was, sober. I was, 8, 9 years sober at that point, almost 10 years. And I was in India and for my second time in India. And I decided I'll go back to school. I'll become a psychotherapist. All I want to do is help people. The whole becoming a Dharma teacher thing was, I was like, if I really had a year to live, I wouldn't become a teacher. I would just be a good student. Even though that was starting to happen for me. And I was like, I would just want to get free. I want to be of service, but I'm not trying to create some sort of teaching platform. I just want to get free and help others. So anyways, when I went back to school, I started writing and papers about my life and experience. And that became the first book, Dharma Punks. I started writing in the late 90s. And, of just saying this is my experience of punk rock, drug addiction, and how recovery and Buddhism changed my life. And how rebellious, how punk rock the Buddha was. And how my whole life I've been going against the norm, because the norm is ignorance. Ignorance is normal. Wisdom is rare. And, punk rock is this fierce critique of the normal ignorance in our society and in our world. And I saw that this commonality with the Buddha who said, go against greed, go against hatred, go against delusion, rebel against the norm, because normal people are asleep, completely asleep. And that is a really radical movement in internal transformation to clear the dust from our eyes and to start seeing clearly and responding wisely. And I said, that's what I want. I'm committed. I'm in. I know I'm going on and on. Anyway, so Dharma Punks, came out in 2003, and it, I just was like, I want to help. This stuff has helped me. Anybody else interested? Any of my peers? And there was a warm reception. A successful a movement got started, and all of a sudden there was Dharma Punks groups popping up, and I was kind of like, punk rock is too DIY and anarchistic to organize. And I was just like, yeah, start your own punk, Dharma Punks group. And all of a sudden there was 20 and 30 and 40 Dharma Punks groups around the country that I wasn't, facilitating. I was just saying hey, get together, using that recovery model of get together and talk about important stuff and meditate together. And then the second book, Against the Stream, where I said, okay, I've shared my story in Dharma Punks, but Against the Stream is, here's what the Buddha taught and how it is a radical, revolutionary, form of internal and external rebellion. And here's how we can apply it to our lives, both in the meditative discipline, developing mindfulness and compassion and forgiveness. And also here's how we can become activists in the world and how it really does apply to creating social change, positive change in the world. Against the Stream then also became the meditation centers. I was in San Francisco and then New York City and then landed in Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, we opened an Against the Stream center, and then we had 2 centers, and then opened a San Francisco center and affiliated groups in Boston and Nashville and Seattle. And And it became this very large movement of centers, and I trained teachers and, authorized people to teach. And it grew and grew, to, the place where we were doing all of these retreats and all of these centers. Out of that came Refuge Recovery. My path was recovery. I didn't want Against the Stream to be only for recovery people, because I didn't want to exclude all of the suffering people who weren't addicts, right? There's a lot of people who aren't addicts who are suffering and seeking some healing. So I always made the Buddhism that I was teaching, Against the Stream, Dharma punks, open to everyone. But like half of our community were in recovery and half weren't. But more and more of the recovery people came to me and said, we really need a Buddhist recovery, because we have Buddhism over here and we have the 12 steps over here, which is very Christian, Judeo-Christian, theistic. And we don't, the reason we're over here in Buddhism is because we don't like theism that much, and we like Buddhism. It's non-theism. And so after some, contemplating it, I guess I had enough ambition or arrogance or whatever it was to say, okay, I'll do it. I'll create a Buddhist recovery program. And so I wrote the book and, launched Refuge Recovery, first in Los Angeles. In 2014, when the book came out, there was a handful of Refuge Recovery meetings from the communities that I had shared the process with and asked people to facilitate the meetings. And I think we're at the place now where there's almost 700 refuge meetings around the world, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And it's become a real viable program, community support for people's recovery, using the core teachings of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path. This is what the Buddha taught to end every form of suffering, including the suffering of addiction. And so I feel quite happy that I was able to facilitate and launch that, and that so many people are saying, yes, this is what we're looking for. It's an alternative to the 12 steps, but also a lot of people use it in conjunction. There's people that are doing AA and NA and Refuge, or other 12-step programs, and they're doing it together with the other programs. And then there's a lot of people who are kind of saying, actually, this makes more sense to me, so I'm just going to do Refuge. And then there's also all of these people, I didn't foresee this happening, who are very 12-step resistant. We would say people are like, I don't want to go to those. But when they found Refuge, it actually made a bridge for them to be able to do 12-step 2. To say, now that I have something that really makes sense to me, I can do this, Refuge, but I can also go and meet all of these great people and fellowship and have community with people and do some 12-step stuff, because now I have a Buddhist view that helps me understand and find my way with this, Judeo-Christian view.
Beautiful. Thank you for laying the foundation for people who didn't know the scope and the size of what we're talking about here. That is a massive organic thing that you've built and has been built. So thank you for sharing all of that. First of all, let me apologize for mispronouncing your last name. As a Traver, I get my name Travis and Trevored and whatnot all the time. So my apologies. I'd love to shift more into your personal life because I think we're slowly setting the stage for the last part of this conversation. And this is something you and I talked about personally because it's something we're both engaged in. But I would love to hear, and this is for those of you who are about to turn your head sideways, how does BDSM and Buddhism interplay in your life? Because I think it's important that we set this before we move on. You could tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, first, let me just say a couple of things about Buddhist sexuality.
Please.
First of all, the Buddha was a celibate. He was somebody who chose to not have sex for the last 50 years of his life. Complete celibacy and no masturbation. And, in Buddhism for monastics is totally celibate. And so it is, as a Western lay Buddhist, there is some challenges around having this spiritual practice that comes from a lineage that says actually celibacy is a better choice. If you're really serious about enlightenment, maybe you will not have sex at all. So it's quite confusing for many Buddhists of like, well, where's the healthy balance? We're lay people, we're choosing to engage sexually. But it leaves a lot to interpretation. The Buddha was pretty liberal about his ideas around sexuality. The sexual misconduct is only behavior that is non-consensual, or that is with somebody even that is betrothed, married. Cheating is sexual misconduct. But the Buddha, he was pretty liberal around consenting adults.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no specifics about what that behavior would be like. Here's one of the things that I think about BDSM, and I don't know if you want to talk about the definitions of that term.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's all of these different kinds of sexual, what we might call kinks or fetishes or tendencies. And many of them are just very natural to people. And in my opinion, not to be judged, but just to kind of bring mindfulness to what is erotic to you. And each person has different tendencies of what is sexy and erotic. In mindfulness, we look at not just sensation. The first foundation of mindfulness is, what are you feeling? What are you feeling in your body? What are you feeling emotionally? What are the sensations, emotions, and at the sense doors, when you're seeing something, when you're hearing something, smelling, tasting. So first of all, mindfulness is being present with what you're receiving at the sense doors. The second foundation of mindfulness is what you're receiving at the sense doors. What's your perception of that? Because both of us could be looking at something, and you would, like, let's say a piece of art. Let's say a piece of erotic art, since we're talking about sex. We could both be sitting there looking at that erotic art, and your eye would say, pleasant, I like that. My perception of that erotic art is, that's very pleasant, is your perception of it. Now, I might be looking at that and say, I think it's gross.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And so it's really, we might have different perceptions of the exact same experience that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And my sense is that that's what BDSM and different kinks are, is that different people have different perceptions of different experiences and sensations.
Right.
So sometimes we would say, there's certain sensations where so let's go into something like spanking.
Sure.
You spank one person on the ass and they say, ouch, that is painful. I don't like that at all. My perception of that sensation, unpleasant. Someone else you spank on the ass and they say, thank you, may I have another? I think that is very pleasant, and thank you for doing that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about mindfulness of sensation and sensuality, I think a simple thing also for the...
Actually, if I could jump in and add one third piece of that, I think someone else would also take that spank on the ass and say, thank you, that was very healing.
Okay.
And that's an aspect of BDSM that doesn't get talked about a lot publicly, because people can't wrap their heads past 50 Shades of Grey or the actual, just the physical viewing of the act or what the act triggers in them as far as their own judgment. But I think that's another element, the upper end of the spectrum. We have, it's gross, don't do that. Oh my God, that hurt. Oh wow, that was really titillating and exciting and erotic. And I actually needed to reprocess, relive, experience this expression that I don't get to in anywhere else in my given life, or I have been shamed for in the past. And this is the avenue and vehicle that I can use to that healing. I think that's an important addition.
I agree with you. I know that what you're saying is true. I have a very dear friend who's a pro dominatrix, and it's really how she sees her work and the work that she does, that it's actually quite healing for people. And I think that this is very important, because often these kind of kinks and BDSM is pathologized, and it's all
for sure.
kind of says that it's this sort of negative thing, rather than the potential that for many people it's quite healing to have that expression.
Definitely.
So the other piece that I was going to bring in, that there's the spanking, but then also like everybody's perception of spicy food, I think is always a good, you put a jalapeno in one person's mouth and they say, no,
they spit it out.
I hate that.
Yeah.
Please no spicy food. You give someone else spicy food and they say more, like, do you have any habaneros? Are there any of those ghost peppers? That intense sensation of what is actually, and we know what spice is actually burn.
Yeah.
It's actually triggering the pain, taste buds.
Yeah.
But many of us like that pain. We say like, oh no, I really like hot sauce. That pain I experience as pleasure. And so I think that's a lot of what BDSM is, and how you bring mindfulness to it is you say, what is my perception of this sensation? And does it feel healthy? And does it feel healing? And does it feel good? And of course, to both parties. And the truth is, I haven't been very engaged in any sort of BDSM community. It's never been my scene.
Okay.
But after what has happened in my life this last year, I've become more interested in that and got more coaching from some of my friends in the BDSM scene of like, how did this happen? I believe that these situations were consensual. And for some reason, I got the feedback that it didn't feel, good to them. And so a lot of
back step for a second, though, if you wouldn't mind. You said that you're not involved in the scene, but that is your particular flavor of sexuality. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm a very versatile person.
It's one of your flavors.
It is, yeah. There's definitely some of what would be considered primal sexuality that is definitely part of my natural expression.
Okay. All right, good. One of the things I could jump in, because I think it's really important that you touched on, and that I love about the BDSM world and expression, even though they have their own challenges. And one of the things I've found to be most helpful as someone in the same, not necessarily greater community and scene, but having that be my preferred sexual expression, is how much conversation there is around consent, which
just what I was going to say.
Entire vanilla world doesn't want to talk about it. It goes, oh my God, they're spanking each other. But you guys haven't had a single conversation at all about what's okay and what's not okay. But in a BDSM scenario or relationship, it's down to the fine detail of, is it okay if I pull on your little toe? Let alone the more extreme expressions that people think of when they hear BDSM. Yeah. And I'm coming at a good portion of my life was spent as a professional fighter. And I look at that scenario as people like, how the hell do two people get in a cage and beat the shit out of each other? Say they do it with consent. And they're both happy to be there. And yeah, you're going to get banged up a little bit. You might get really hurt. But at the end of the day, you shake hands and hug and go, wow, thanks. I needed you for that. You needed me for that. The rest of the world thinks we're nuts, but we don't give a fuck because we needed that. But the consent piece, and I want that highlighted as we talk further, but if you had something you were going to add in, I'd love to hear it.
No, I think that going to the consent conversation is important. I was just going to say what you were saying. That has been a great education for me is how much negotiation and sometimes even contracts.
Yeah, for sure.
Signed contracts in these situations, which is not that's not been part of my, I feel quite, I always felt quite committed to communicating.
Yeah.
But maybe not all of the specific details of everything. I was very, I've always been very kind of clear about like, what do you like and what do you don't like? And this is what I like and don't like. And
right.
That kind of communication about sex has been very natural to me and actually erotic. I like to talk about about what, what we may or may not do.
Right. I've told when I teach guys this in the form of consent, and I hear, doesn't that take the sexiness out of it? Say, oh, no. It's like getting to see every single ingredient that you get to cook with, smell it, taste it, feel it, and be like, oh, wow, I just looked at the whole menu. Now I get to decide and orchestrate, what is this meal going to be?
Yeah.
It's not arousing. It's not linear and clinical and like, okay, do you like this? Check. No, it's usually a very engaging, lively conversation. And for those of you that haven't had a full consent conversation with your partner, tonight would be a really great night. Give it a go. And if you have questions about that, feel free to hit me up. So if I could, please.
One more thing.
Sure.
Before we go, absolutely, let's talk about consent. So important.
Yeah.
And but I just want to, in this general, like BDSM and Buddhism.
Yeah.
My feeling is mindfulness is to be brought to every activity of our life. When the Buddha teaches sitting meditation, he says, now bring this into your walking and standing and when you're laying down, and bring this into every single activity of your life. Present time, non-judgmental, investigative awareness. Be present and see how you're feeling and how you're responding to those sensations and feelings. And so we have to bring that into our sexuality. Whether your sexuality is completely vanilla, traditional, whatever we want to call it, or it is not that, we bring that kind of awareness to all of our activities. And so we bring it to our sexuality. Buddhists are not very good at talking about this.
Sexuality?
About sexuality. And
nobody is.
Sexuality, yes. Nobody is. Especially religion isn't. Yeah. And, some of it's our, very, oppressed, puritanical Western conditioning. And, even like Americans in general are more repressed than Europeans.
Yeah.
So then we have these American Buddhists who have this celibate teacher and they're not talking about sex. Over and over when I'm giving a Dharma talk about sex, people who've been practicing Buddhism for decades come up to me and say, you're the first Dharma teacher I've ever heard really talk about sex. Yeah.
Especially here in the US, we need a massive, I think it's like $70 trillion. I just made that up. Amount of money going into pornography. And yet if we see a nipple on television, we lose our collective fucking minds. And we also do not have a single conversation or very few of us have conversations with our partners. What turns you on? What do you enjoy? Just that very, very first question. I've talked to dozens and dozens of women over the past year about their experiences with dating men. And so many of them say, I just was never asked what turned me on, nor do I really think he cared. And I think that is a colossal challenge as a men's person, as a men's movement person. And that's what I do appreciate about BDSM and the conversation. What I'd love to touch on real quick while we stay on this subject is two aspects specifically around Buddhism. And I know you kind of touched on it, but how would you reconcile kind of the obtuse word power dynamics sexually in relation to Buddhism, and then the infliction of pain, even though knowing it's being perceived as not a negative in the face of Buddhism? Do those questions make sense?
Sure.
Please.
It makes sense. I don't know if I have any real coherent answers for them. I mean, I feel like power dynamics are just natural. There's always power exchange. And in my own life, sometimes I'm sitting at the feet of my teachers and they're in the power position and I'm bowing. I was just in Thailand, touching my forehead to the ground in front of my teachers and, in the very submissive posture. And then often I'm in the power position. And I feel like in sex too, there's a give and a take and an exchange.
Right.
So I just feel like, power dynamics are fluid and natural. And, I don't think there's ever a time where it's like, hey, we're always completely here. No, sometimes you're on top and sometimes I'm on top. And
completely agree. Completely agree.
I to get on top for a little while.
Catch my breath. Yeah.
As far as the, I think you said inflicting, let's call it an intense sensation.
Okay.
On somebody that they're perceiving as pleasant. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That they're, that's something that could even be healing or at least enjoyable for them.
Mm-hmm.
Seems generous, seems
Mm-hmm.
mutual, and seems completely. I know some people are going to pathologize all of it and say like, oh no, you're hurting somebody, and the only reason they like to be spanked or whatever it is because of their own past trauma or something like that. I don't think it's true.
I think it's a projection.
True, but I don't think it's always true. I think that very often it's very natural for some people to want to be submissive, some people to want to be dominant, and
definitely
to enjoy those roles.
Yeah, I wish the whole country too would take a deep breath and hear that. Sorry, and I wish everybody could just go, okay, it's okay. The APA just put something out saying aggression and dominance is bad. Yet it's natural to a lot of humans.
I feel like it's quite natural in the consensual,
definitely
appropriate, appreciated scenario
with consciousness present. Absolutely.
I have a client a counseling client just yesterday. We were doing a session right at the end of our counseling session. She kind of like shut down for a moment and said, I want to talk about something that's important, but I don't, it's hard. And you know what it was is that she wanted to talk about loving being submissive, but that she had shame about it.
Yeah, I run into
it was hard, and we didn't get all the way into it, but that was my sense, is that it was, the societal stigma on her wanting to be dominated, and that was pleasant and healing and wonderful for her, had been so pathologized that she had to bring it to therapy.
Right.
Rather than just, a loving acceptance of, oh, love what you love.
Right. And find someone who can facilitate that experience for you with an extraordinary amount of space holding, trust, and care. And you've got yourself some medicine. Let's call it what it is. You've got yourself an experience that's going to be both evolutionary, revolutionary, and healing. And isn't that what we're all after anyway? I think the demonization of power dynamic, especially in sex, is one of my goals for this year, is to shine a whole bunch of light on it and just open up the conversation even further. Let's transition if we can. So we've set the framework of who you are, what you've built, and certain ways that you interact with the world. And if you wouldn't mind,
how it has crumbled.
Yeah. If you wouldn't mind filling in everybody listening on what's going on in your life. And I have to say this because there are people who are just about ready to write me an email. We're hearing one side of this and the other parties aren't here. And so we're not trying to decide guilt or innocence or speak on behalf of someone who's not here. I just want to have a conversation with the person who is here. Noah, if you would.
Oh, aren't we just about out of time? Sorry.
We're going to go, man. This thing's, I took the night off. We're rolling, brother. Let it go.
Series of events about a year ago in my life and with my community that began with a woman that I had been seeing for a couple of months and who in one way or another, after we had slept together several times, and after one of the last times we slept together, she contacted me and said, I want to talk to you about consent. And in a text message and in my memory of it, we had a lot of conversations about likes and dislikes and everything within it and within our sexuality. And we had many experiences where she had said, okay, let's not do that, or let's stop doing this. And her communication with me had been pretty good, I believe. And mine with her had been good. And so when she contacted me after our last experience, I was like, what do you mean consent? Like, why would this even be a question? Because you didn't say anything to me at the time about being unhappy. And I know you can because you have in the past.
Got it.
So And she just refused to communicate with me about it.
That was the end of the conversation.
That was the end. Yeah, really. I mean, at one point she said, I wanted you to come see my therapist. And I said, we've been seeing each other for a couple of months. I'm, like doing a couple session. I would like to just hear from, like to communicate directly with you.
Person to person. Yeah.
And she was not willing to speak with me. But several months later, the police came to my home and said, this woman has filed an assault charge against you.
A sexual assault charge.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sexual assault. And they said, do you know who she is? And I said, yeah, of course. We were dating, a few months ago. And so then it just shut down to like, okay, I have to get a lawyer. And
she filed a criminal charge, just so we're clear.
Filed a complaint. The police looked into it and said, we're not going to charge you with anything.
Gotcha.
So there was never a charge. But the accusation itself then came from around, I don't know what happened, but then her meditation teacher, she was not a student of mine. She was a different form of Buddhism. Her teacher sent a letter to all of my organizations saying, my student said Noah sexually assaulted her. And then that led to this like investigation, and my colleagues at Against the Stream saying, we're going to suspend you. Now, they already completely knew about it. I told them about it from the beginning. One of the other teachers there had dated this woman. They were intimately aware of the whole situation. Okay. But for some other maybe political reasons, and this was right at the kind of beginning of the Me Too, they said, we're just going to remove you. And then they publicly said, we're doing this investigation, and told the whole world about it. Oh, wow. Which led to the demise of our whole community. Wow. Some of it was led, I believe, kind of led and somewhat intentionally based in some resentment in my community. Okay. So I don't want to get too much into that.
Can I circle back to the...
I'll just
Sure.
In the investigation, after 5 months, it came back to me and they said, there's 2 other women who said that they had been on a date with you. Okay. And your, although I hadn't been sexual, intercourse with either of them, but that your way that you kissed or that the way that you were with them was too intense or too aggressive for them. Okay. And so then, it's from one woman that I had been dating to 2 other kind of women that I'd been on 1 or 2 dates with. And they said, there's 3 women who have felt harmed by you. And, and it was very confusing to me. And I kind of landed in this, like, I'll take full responsibility for anything that I've done that's been unskillful. Okay. And, like, if I've caused harm, I'll take responsibility. I'll make amends. My sense of each one of these experiences was that it felt consensual and like there was communication at the time. And that this is like, 6 months later, they're coming and saying, I didn't say anything at the time, but I actually was very unhappy about what had happened, or somewhat unhappy about what had happened.
Was there a conversation about consent? Like, do you feel like you clearly knew the rules of consent? Because we can't speak on their behalf. But do you feel like there was an understanding of like, cool, we've had the consent conversation. It's not just a feeling out thing. It's not energy it's like, yep, I know what consent is. Do you feel like that was covered with each of these 3 cases?
I think I would say no. I think that mostly it wasn't a clear, it was, are we going to kiss? Oh, yes, we're kissing. Right. Like on the first date, like, okay, we had dinner. Are we going to kiss goodnight or not? It wasn't let's have a conversation about whether there's consent to kiss. It was just, kind of the lean in. Do you want to kiss? Oh, yes, you do want to kiss. Okay. And so it was very much that, like, clearly consensual making out. I think that, all 3 of them would say, yes, totally consensual beginning. And then at some point, one of the accusations was that after we had been making out for some time, I tried to put my hand down her pants.
Okay.
And that I didn't have consent for that. You know,
Were you stopped from doing that?
That the ass, you know, grabbing the butt was okay and boobs were okay, but third base was not okay.
Were you physically stopped from doing that or verbally stopped from doing that?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
She said no, and I said, okay.
And you stopped?
Totally stopped.
Okay. So to me, that's not a violation of consent. That's an adherence to consent. Was no, don't go there.
Don't go
And
there.
you didn't.
The way that I heard the accusation was that she felt unsafe and that she shouldn't have had to ask me to stop.
Can we unpack that a little bit? So it was just a general sense of a lack of sense of safety?
That's, I mean, in what I read from her was that she said I felt unsafe, and that I shouldn't have had to ask him to stop in that way, that he was being too intense for me.
Okay. And I've read both of the Jezebel stories, and then so those are the two, let's call them less than skillful dating stories, because those were articulated, stop, you did, perhaps you shouldn't have, or you didn't have a green light to, which I know some people get very, very upset with this, but I believe is different than an actual sexual assault. And that sounds like that's what we're talking about in the third case with the woman who you had been with multiple times. So if I can repeat the question, with the woman who you had been with multiple times, did you feel like you clearly knew the rules of consent with her? And that, again, we can't speak on her behalf. Was there a conversation that happened?
100%. We had
Okay.
the conversation. We had continued to have the conversations. We had talked about safe words. Like everything
Beautiful.
was really, the communication was really good.
Do you feel that you abided by those rules of consent?
I do.
So do you feel like you did anything wrong? And I know wrong's a loaded word.
So I haven't been able to identify a moment in our interaction that I felt like I wasn't that I was unskillful. But here's the thing, Trevor. She walked away from it feeling harmed. That's what she reported later. So I don't know what happened.
Right.
She didn't tell me at the time. There was no moment where she said stop and I didn't stop. There was none of that.
Mm-hmm.
But she walked away from it and said, that wasn't good for me, which left me confused, saying like, well, why didn't you tell me? And to this day, I've never been informed of like, what about it didn't feel good. After we were together, we laid in bed. She had made me cookies. We ate cookies. We talked for some time.
Right.
She didn't tell me that there was anything amiss. We kissed goodnight. She went home.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple days later, when all this happened, I was like, how could that be? Why wouldn't you have told me at the time that you were unhappy? Because
I'm having trouble making a leap from something didn't feel good to I need to go to the police. And I think we need to talk about that in the frame of Me Too, and in the frame of what the ramifications of that action set are, given what you've now experienced.
Yeah. Absolutely. So important. And I'm still at a loss for how did it get to that?
So when your organization came to you, did they do the same math that I just did and still come up with a different number at the bottom? Where I say, okay, wasn't asked to stop, wasn't given any kind of physical notification, verbal notification. The after effect appears to have been we laid in bed. And as a human, to me, and just as a human, to me, that sounds like, okay, this was a kosher experience. This was a consensual sexual experience. No matter what transpired within it, as far as if there was aggression, violence, that was all consensual. To me, this sounds like this was a positive experience. I'm not saying that it was, because clearly there was a misinterpretation. So your organization did that same math and came up with a different number.
I think that the only math that was done was, they hired a professional investigator, and that investigator, all that came back, because actually I know the same thing that you know about this, because I wasn't actually told anything, but I know from that Jezebel article that the investigator sat with the detective and the woman that I had been dating, and that all they said was something about that interaction was non-consensual. Something about it. It's never. I've never been told, and I don't think anybody was ever told what about it was non-consensual. It started consensual, obviously, if she would 100%, and it continued, but that at some moment she felt that there was no longer consent. Now, where I'm sitting over here, having been in the experience and saying, I was never notified that consent was removed.
Mm-hmm. Now,
I've been now aware of some of the consent stuff where they say you should check in every few minutes to say, is this still okay? I was not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I was not continuing to say, is this still okay? I know it was okay 5 minutes ago, but is it okay now?
Do you believe that should be a parameter for consent, given what you've been through? And even hearing that, I'm curious who that puts the onus on, just to be a 50-50 participant in an act, right? I think that is a massive question that needs to get chewed on and looked at from a number of different angles of, does that make you entirely responsible for consent? Does it make you, and is it just because you're the male? If suddenly it switches and now you're in a submissive position, is she required to check in with you every 5 minutes?
From what I understand, that is the sort of new definition and working definition that some of the universities are talking about, and that the onus is on the male all of the time.
On the male all of the time.
That's some of what I've read.
Okay. Universities and I are thinking differently these days, but let's continue. How do you feel? How do you feel given all of this? How do you feel with about the people you are involved with about your organization, you as a human having to live through what appears to be, from your side, a massive amount of unfairness? And we can take let's take the politicalization of it, there may have been for lack of a better term, conspiracy, or this fed into a conspiracy. But you as a man, how do you feel about this?
I have a lot of different feelings about it.
Yeah.
As a man, I feel like Me Too is a really good thing.
Beautiful. I do too.
I feel like the imbalance and oppression in this country and in this world towards women, the lack of respect and equality is a travesty, mm-hmm. and terrible, and needs to be rectified. So I sit in a place where I feel very much in favor of taking down predators and taking down people who are abusing their power, 100%. So I sit in that place. When I look at what's going on in the world, I think there's a lot of good coming of mm-hmm. the wave. So it's quite hard for me to sit in my personal place, because my view is that this is a good and necessary movement that I support, and that I believe in equality. And I believe that that women and men, even though there are power dynamics, mm-hmm. That actually that we are equal. And I really believe that. And I feel like I've spent a lot of my life trying to support and be an ally, and mm-hmm. and I'm very much a dude.
Right. And from what it appears, you're also very much, I'm not going to use the word victim, but Me Too has also, I don't even know how to articulate this. You are an unintended consequence of Me Too, if what you say is correct. And we can also say, I'm also a massive proponent of equality, which is why I'm curious about why consent belongs only to the male, but maybe we'll just put that to the side. How do you personally feel?
How I personally feel is, I feel sad that I caused any harm to anyone. Like I really do my best to live my life in a way that I'm helping and not hurting. And so, when people say you've hurt me, I believe them. I also know whether it was intentional or unintentional.
Right.
And so, I can land in this place of like, oh, I didn't intentionally cause harm to anybody, and this, doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
But also, if somebody says that they were hurt, then I say, okay, I believe you, and I'll apologize. Because I'm sure that.
But are you sorry? Is sorry the right word?
Yeah, no,
right?
I regret that anything that I've done has caused harm to anyone else. I empathize and have compassion. Anything that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yes, some of this just feels like it's not true. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around it being true. But I also have enough humility, I hope, to know that I'm not perfect, and I'm sure I've caused harm, and I've offended people. When Against the Stream did their investigation, one of the teachers there started spreading there's 10 accusations against Noah. And, then everybody was like, Noah sexually assaulted 10 different women. What it turned out was that there were 3 women who had, complaints against me. And then there were 7 to 10 other ones of people saying, like, Noah offended me in a Dharma talk. I think Noah.
I find Noah offensive.
Yes, yeah, all of that, so there was a lot of criticism that were part of that 10.
Yeah.
And then there were 3 women who I had dated. So I know that I'm not perfect, and I know that I cause harm sometimes. I also know that I've never intentionally forced anybody sexually in any way. And that actually, we were talking about BDSM earlier. If it's not mutually enjoyable, I don't have any sadism in me that likes people. I'm very sensitive.
Yeah.
I don't want to cause harm to anybody. I only want to do it if it's fun for both of us.
Agreed.
So I know that's totally true about me. So I feel sad. I feel.
No, are you at all saying what you think should be said?
No.
Because it feels like a huge, like, archetypal, I got me to let me say these things. I feel bad. I feel sad. I can put myself in her position. I have to play small. I can't. That comes down given, no matter what the situation is.
No, it's sincere for me. Like I actually do have empathy. And I've been practicing compassion meditation for 30 years.
Of course.
It's not what I'm supposed to say. It's actually how I feel. But it's also very, it's convoluted, because I also feel totally betrayed by some of my closest friends. I feel like, a huge harm was caused to our community that was absolutely unnecessary.
Right.
The destruction of something that I built for 30 years.
Right.
So I also feel angry and totally like sitting in the sort of rubble and the dust settling of like, how the fuck did this happen?
Yeah.
And then the mind says, this totally didn't need to happen. Now, where I really go is into acceptance and forgiveness. This didn't have to happen. This was not this was not deserved. This was not the appropriate way to handle these accusations. There was a way to do it for the community, with the community, for this to be an opportunity for healing. But instead it was an opportunity, it was used as a way to really cause deep, deep harm to a lot of people, not just me.
Yeah. Before acceptance and forgiveness, I often punch holes in the wall. Is there and I don't have your depth of practice or scope of practice. Was there rage? Was there anger? Like, you lost your life's mission. Did you jump from holy fuck, I can't believe this happened, to acceptance and forgiveness? Or did you want to fuck some shit up? And if you didn't, why not? And I'm asking for the, like, was there anger? Was there rage? Like, talk to me, man.
Not much. Because I've been meditating for 30 years. And because I've trained my mind to feel the anger and to respond to it with kindness and with compassion and with forgiveness. And it's become my habit. So I don't punch walls, and I don't, what I have noticed a lot and have talked about a lot is that my mind has been giving me terrible advice about, oh, you should get revenge, or you should do this, or you should sue everybody. And like my mind, so it's not that there's no negative thoughts or feelings, but I don't believe my mind. And I don't obey, I talked about 30 years ago sitting in that juvenile hall cell.
Yeah.
Where my mind was giving me bad advice. And I started to learn to break my addiction and identification with my mind. So now I turn towards my mind and I say, that's a terrible idea. You're encouraging me to create more suffering on top of an already very painful situation. I think I'll choose acceptance and forgiveness.
And to people who are curious about bypass, can you explain how that's not bypassed and what bypass would look like in the face of that?
Bypass would look like if we didn't allow ourselves to feel it.
So you felt that anger, you felt that rage.
And I sit with it, and I cried, and I went into the sweat lodge, and I yelled, like I had some cathartic experiences.
Okay, good. So this wasn't clean. Was there a little messiness?
I don't know. I think you'd have to ask people around me. Some of my friends who are tuned in here, actually, I'd say a little bit messy. I don't know. I feel like I've been pretty just like steadily going like, okay, this is my practice. Okay. Now, the other thing, here's what I want to maybe end with. I know we're running out of time.
We're good on time. I have one more question and we'll wrap it up.
I'm running out of time.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Gotcha.
Here's a reflection that I have about this whole experience for me. I love intensity.
Me too.
Part of what got me into all of this, it's part of what built Dharma Punks and Against the Stream and Refuge Recovery, is that I love to like experience, novel things and take risks. And, I opened meditation centers and signed 5-year leases without any ability to pay for it, trusting that like the money would come. And it came. I like these sort of intense situations. Yeah. So this experience in my life where I lost almost all of my income. Yeah. I lost, almost all of my opportunities to be of service and to continue. They shut down my friends and colleagues, closed my meditation community. My board of directors that I appointed at Refuge Recovery is going to take me to court to try to get the trademark and my book rights from me. Like this, it's so intense.
It's like Game of Thrones.
It's totally
the Buddhist Game of Thrones.
It's castle intrigue. It's totally that. Take down the thing, totally. It's very unpleasant on some level. Yeah. It's very intense. And I, in some level, am enjoying the opportunity to practice what I preach.
Wow, that's profound.
To practice big compassion, big forgiveness in the midst of big pain and big loss and big grief. I am not bypassing it. I am feeling it. And I am responding to it. And I am being with it.
Wow. Thank you for that. I think that's magic. Yeah. In wrapping up, where can people find more of you if they're interested? Where can they find what you're doing next or what you're continuing to build? Because I believe that there's still a lot of people who see the message or want the message or that still want more of what you have to offer?
Yeah. My website, I'm building a new website, noahlevine.com, and that's where I'm doing a lot of my stuff and scheduling,
Beautiful.
and going to start streaming. I stream my Monday night class every week on Facebook, on the Noah Levine public page on Facebook, Monday night at 7:30 Pacific time. So that's free. Dharma, a lot of people tune into that. Also on the Instagram, Noah Levine 108 page. And, that's it. And, everything has sort of crumbled and I'm going to rebuild.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Thank you for sharing this. I know this was not
your living room.
Yeah, thank you. For those of you who are interested in what I'm doing, you can find me at Traverboehm, TraverBoehm on Instagram, as well as manuncivilized.com. And every Thursday night, unless I'm traveling, we're in here doing these kinds of conversations, finding interesting people that you may not know, and having the conversations that people aren't willing to have, but I believe are so necessary. So with that, guys, please, let's take a minute, put your hands together if it's something you do. Noah, if you'd like to end us in any way, I'd be happy to have you end us. If not.
Sure. It's my understanding as a Buddhist that there is merit developed when we discuss important things and we dedicate our lives to creating positive change. I believe you're doing that. I know I'm trying to do that, and that most of the people tuning in are with us. So if we could all share that merit and blessings of our actions outward in all directions, may we create a positive change on this planet where there is more equality, where there is more kindness, where there's more wisdom. And together may we create this change in a way that no individual can create all on our own. Thank you. Happy to be here. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you guys. As I like to end, go be uncivilized. See you next Thursday. Cheers. Thank you, Noah.